Welcome to Designing Motherhood and one of our final programs for the duration of this exhibition. It's a noontime talk entitled Infrastructures of Care. We've had really robust programming for this exhibition. It's in its fifth iteration. It's traveled from Philadelphia and Boston to Seattle, and it's now on view concurrently here in Houston for the first time in the Southern United States, and in Sweden at ArcDes. So we're really, really pleased and honored to be sharing this important curatorial project, which is multivalent. It's a Instagram archive, a book from MIT Press, a kind of ever-evolving exhibition that is site-specific and kind of regionally specific in each iteration. And today we have an incredibly esteemed panel of speakers, Alicia, Eggert, Martha Poggioli, Regá and Gordon Waggett, Taeshaun Walters, and Fran Wang. I'm going to just make sure that our Facebook Live is back on, and then we'll get started with Alicia's presentation. Forgive the technical difficulties. We'll continue to navigate these unforeseen technical errors. Okay, so I'm delighted to, the format of today's talk is kind of a lightning round presentations to give you a peek into each of these artist, designer, practitioners' work, and then we'll regather at the end and have a moderated conversation and Q&A. So I'm delighted to turn it over to our first speaker, Alicia Eggert, an interdisciplinary artist whose practice gives material form to language and time across a variety of mediums. Eggert has exhibited at incredible institutions, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Kafa Art Museum in Beijing, the Triennial Design Museum in Milan, Everson Museum of Art, and Telfair Museums. The artist has received a TED Fellowship, Long Now Foundation Fellowship, Hopper Prize, SNR Foundation Washington Award, Harpo Foundation Direct Artist Grant, Nasher Sculpture Center Artist Micro Grant, and Maine Arts Commission Artist Fellowship. Eggert is an associate professor of studio art at the University of North Texas, and she is an exhibiting artist in this iteration of Designing Motherhood. Please welcome Alicia Eggert.
Thank you all for being here, both in person and virtually. It's a huge honor to be on this panel with the other speakers, but also to be included in the exhibition. Okay, since it's lightning, I'll go through this pretty quickly. So I'm a conceptual artist at heart, but I'm also a sculptor. So I really believe in giving words and ideas a physical form in order to give someone an experience they could have in person as a way of hopefully understanding that idea more fully by experiencing it in real space and real time. So I consider language my primary sculptural material, and I give language different physical forms depending on the concepts and the words that I'm working with. As you can see here, this is powder-coated steel bent into the shape of a staircase, using the words that actually describe those parts of a stair. Okay. Sorry, there's a little bit of a technical thing going on.
Sorry, I was trying to move this.
That's okay. So in addition to the words themselves containing meaning, I really believe like experiencing the words in that physical space brings you to a new understanding of that meaning. And I also, now it's not working anymore here. Now there we go. Okay. I also believe that the materials used to create the sculptural forms also contain their own meaning. But there's a really important element of time in all of my work. Either the work changes over time as you experience it in space, or it actually changes over time. In this case, using cut flowers that wilt and die over the course of an exhibition. To spell the word alas. So I'm really inspired. This is an image of my studio on the left and an image of things that inspire me in the world on the right. I'm really inspired by signage because I love the way that commercial signage has already figured out strategies for quickly communicating ideas in ways that we can all understand in a very immediate way. They're very accessible to the public. And I love co-opting these methods and using them to communicate messages that I think have more meaning and hopefully inspire people to kind of reflect on their own situation and have a sense of wonder about the world. So light is one of my primary mediums. I love working with neon. I came to work with it when I was in graduate school at Alfred University in upstate New York. I love the way that neon is like a bent glass tube that's filled with a noble gas and electrified. But I love working with light in a conceptual way as well, because I love thinking about the way that light travels across space and time. And so technically everything we're seeing is an image of the past, even if only a split second ago. And when I make signs, I love using the actual context of the world around the sign to create an additional layer of meaning. And I love the way that not only does a message change when you turn one word on and off, but also the message changes depending on where it's cited in the world. So as you can see on a geographical island in Maine on the left, and then of course the island of Manhattan in the background on the right. I think the preacher's daughter in me loves bringing my work out into the world and engaging as broad of a public audience as possible. So thinking about all the different places I can cite my work. This is a rooftop in Russia. Versus a uninhabited island in Maine, where the word forever was meant to appear and disappear in the fog in the landscape. But essentially, I love bringing my work out to the world where someone could happen upon it in their lives in the same way you would happen upon any other kind of sign, but have the opportunity to have that sort of reflective moment in your daily life. And occasionally I'm bringing work into extremely remote locations as well, where perhaps no one will see it. So as you can see, documentation is a really important element to my work as well, because the amount of time it actually spends in a place is often very limited. And so I've been thinking a lot about site specificity in my work for many, many years, but it was actually in 2019 that I started thinking about time specificity and the way that not only can my work change from place to place, but it can also change from over time and mean different things at different times. So this is a neon sign that I made for a solo exhibition in Portugal in 2019 that says, "This present moment used to be the unimaginable future." And at the time, it was a really optimistic sort of message inspired by all what I identified as really positive change happening as a result of the Me Too movement, which started in 2017. And this is actually a quote from a futurist named Stuart Brand. And the pink color that I chose for it was a really specific to that Me Too movement, sort of call out. But I realized that this message actually changes over time. And the color is also, continues to be political. And when this work was shown at the Renwick Gallery at the Smithsonian in 2022, it was right around the time that Roe v. Wade was overturned. So what was a really positive, uplifting sort of a message 3 years prior became very different very quickly, overnight. So I'm really inspired by Tanya Bruguera's writing about this essay that Tanya wrote for Art Forum called Notes on Political Timing Specificity. So thinking about not only how an artwork can be time specific, but also that it could actually play a role in conversations happening at that time. As Tanya says, intervene at that moment when policies are taking shape. So this continues to inspire me, and I'm trying to always figure out how my work can play this role. And I was really fortunate that in 2022, I was invited to collaborate with Planned Parenthood and design and fabricate a sign that would be installed on the steps of the Supreme Court on the 49th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, which was actually in January 2022, before the overturn of Roe. Planned Parenthood administration could kind of see the writing on the wall and what was about to happen. So this was an activation that they decided to do that was sort of in the lead up to the overturn of Roe v. Wade. This sign was actually only on the steps of the Supreme Court for about an hour because Planned Parenthood got a film permit to film the video I'm about to show you. But very quickly were asked by security to remove the sign, but we were able to fortunately capture these amazing images. Okay, and this is the video that Planned Parenthood made. Well, I've been to the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court has left us in the dark. Planned Parenthood has been across country to shine a light on our rights.
So it was shortly after that Supreme Court activation that the sign actually did go on a road trip across the country with Planned Parenthood to different Planned Parenthood organizations around the country in states that were going to be affected by the overturn of Roe and the trigger laws that came shortly after. And that is actually something else that's a really important part of my practice, is to not only temporarily erect signs in different public locations around the world, but also to put signs on the backs of trucks and drive them around as like mobile signs. But during that cross-country tour with Planned Parenthood, and also for that Supreme Court activation, the sign, you may have noticed, looks a little bit different from my other neon signs. It was made of LED neon on acrylic, which was used really specifically because it wouldn't break in this really quick setup and breakdown that had to take place in this really specific location. But craft has always been really important to me because, like I said, I am a sculptor at heart, and I love to make well-crafted objects and use neon not only for the collaboration with craftspeople and the really beautiful techniques and materials that are used to create it, but also because of the quality of light that it emits. It's, you know, there's these noble gases inside of a glass tube that glow, and it's quite magical. So I was really fortunate in 2022 to not only show this work in Texas, in Dallas, with an exhibition called Is It Real? Contemporary Artists Address Reproductive Freedom, but I was also given the opportunity to recreate the original sign in glass neon with a mobile steel structure that kind of assembles modularly on site. So this is the work in Dallas on the rooftop where that exhibition took place. And of course, this is after abortion became essentially illegal in Texas. So it was really meaningful to me to be able to show this work here in the state that I live in now. And I'm also very honored to show it here in Designing Motherhood. You know, to think about the ways that that abortion plays a really important role in maternal care and maternal health. I just wanted to put a little pitch that in addition to having the sign in the show, I also created these lenticular postcards that are for sale in the gift shop, and proceeds from the postcards will actually go, a portion of them will be donated to Planned Parenthood. So thank you so much for your time. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And on to our next lightning round. I'm pleased to introduce Martha Poggioli. Let me pull up her slideshow first.
There we go.
Okay, Martha is an Australian artist based in the United States. She's currently a visiting artist professor at Colorado College, and her work takes on legacies of design, industry, medicine, and technology to create sculpture, new media, and installation. Her recent work has investigated the histories and form of reproductive technology, as well as research and development in the minimally invasive surgical space. Poggioli has exhibited at John Michael Kohler Art Center, Kunstkörper Museum, Mass Art Museum, the Australian Tapestry Workshop, Mutter Museum, and many other prestigious organizations across the country and internationally. I'm delighted to turn it over to you, Martha.
Thanks, Sarah. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Sarah, so much for having me here, and for everyone for joining. I generally talk over time, so I'll try and be fast. So this is my IED. I had it inserted into my body in 2017 before I moved to the States. She's romantically called multi-load 375 standard. It's not so easy to find this particular device in the States. IUDs are actually really regional objects, just like societies and cultures and people. Hopefully these videos work. When I got my IUD inserted into me, I sort of went down this rabbit hole and realized that you can actually trace a history of material technology through contraceptive devices. So you start in the Bronze Age and then you go all the way to this kind of chemical present that we're in. And so that sort of started it off for me. And I really got pulled in pretty quickly to this idea also that these devices haven't changed, but also a lot has changed. So these two devices, thousands of years apart, same form, same shape, different material, same use. So the torus or the donut form continues to interest me. Gentry Sayers talks about this idea of prototyping the past. And that's kind of the shape of my practice has been formed around this idea of remaking objects. And so one of my earliest interests was really in remaking these objects as a way to kind of perform the labor that's required to make them, and then also to kind of think about their value at that time. So I consulted with the curator at the Wellcome Collection, or the London Science Museum, where the Wellcome Collection's held. This object cast in bronze, I went through the process of remaking it. I brought part of the device here today, so you can all kind of hold it in your hand. And the idea of kind of holding the object in my hand, being able to access the thing, has been of kind of great interest to me. Sort of thinking about, it took me a lot of work and time to remake this thing, but thinking about that value back then, before we had electric devices and machines to actually produce this thing, what was the value of that at that time? So really interested in this idea that prototyping the past gives us this ability to understand the entanglement of technology and culture. And around this time, I also came across this really wonderful place on the internet called Google Patents. I would go there if you haven't already. There's also the US Patent Office, but Google Patents is really accessible, and it's just a place that you can go check out patents online. I think of a patent as the ultimate speculative document. It's also an official document, but you can own a patent, you can own an idea or an object in speculative form, and it never really makes it to market quite often. I also think of patents as this sort of colonial trait, right? It sort of gives you the ability to kind of own intellectual property in this sort of abstract landscape of information. This here is the Darko shield. I'll return to it, but it's quite an important and also terrifying device in the history of modern contraceptive technology. And so I have this fun thing that I do. I call it digital hoarding. it's not dissimilar to making an exhibition checklist. So I sort of have this vast, unending spreadsheet that I continue to proliferate with patents pertaining to reproductive technology. I've been doing this since 2018, and the map continues to expand. And so I also make a point to not just sort of download these devices, or sorry, these PDFs of devices, but I sort of go through not only the drawings, but also the language. And so with these maps, or with this information, I make maps. So the first one being in Spaces at Cleveland, in Cleveland at Spaces in 2021, just before the first Designing Motherhood show opened in Philadelphia. But in Cleveland, we plotted this out on a horizontal wall, starting in the 1830s and finishing in 2021. There were about 500 pieces in this earlier map. So many pieces actually that we ran out of time to install it. And so for the members preview, we actually invited members from the museum to come in and draw directly on the wall with us. So they're blueprint drawings or sort of tracings. And actually this act of remaking and redrawing the thing, to me is like really, really interesting. It kind of gives me this ability to own the thing or have ownership over this thing that I feel in some ways has ownership over me. And yeah, I think people really appreciate being able to do this with me. So really difficult to photograph this work, and also somewhat devastating to have to paint over it. So it's kind of an ephemeral work. In 2020, I went up to Kohler in Wisconsin and was an artist in residence at the arts industry program in the foundry at Kohler. And I intentionally went up there to remake more devices cast in metal. So I talked about prototyping the past, but I actually think I'm a bit of a hacker. I love this quote by Mackenzie Walk. She says, "Every hack is an expression of the inexhaustible multiplicity of the future." So kind of that expansive idea of what it means to make. And so I continue to make these devices. Remaking the Darko shield was a big part of my early proposal at Kohler. So using 3D modeling processes to CNC a large pattern to make it as large as I could, sort of express the kind of weight that this device holds in the history of reproductive devices, and then to cast it in iron. And when I said remake, I mean, I really mean remake. It's incredibly intensive and exhausting process, also being a petite femme in an industrial foundry, remaking these objects. So, you know, the physicality of it as well has been really important to my understanding of what I can do as a body, and what making physically can express. So this is one of the shields. I intentionally sliced it in half. This idea of abstraction and specificity, those two things together is really interesting to me. I think that design drawings and scientific drawings do both of those things, right? You're at once abstracting the thing, trying to minimize it or simplify it, slice it in half or open it up in order to actually be more specific. So I continue to kind of enact or mirror these methods. Just some more shots of the work installed. I've spent some time in medical museums. The Dittrich Medical History Center at Case Western Reserve University has the Percy Sky collection, which is one of the most extensive collections of reproductive technology in at least the States. And while I was there, I discovered many things, but one of the things of great interest to me is that my IUD, LOAD 375, is actually, I guess, the kin of the Darko shield. So though the Darko shield was pulled off the market in the 70s for various, it was designed improperly and resulted in a lot of violent outcomes. Its form and its function and its shape and its design still persist in a kind of, a chronology of IUDs. And so I sort of make maps of them as well in sculptural form. So these are sort of claw type devices that all have a kind of relationship to the Darro shield and to my IUD. So I'm making forms that evoke this idea of the objects pressing into the body. I'll just quickly chat about Mr. Kafka. He's not the Kafka, but he's my Kafka. He sort of his writing, his patent really embodied kind of my interest in this whole kind of world of IP and of gynecologic sculpture, as I call it. I'll just quote the patent here, but he says, a separate mold must be taken in the case of every person for whom the insertions are intended, because the shape of the cervix varies in every person, so that it is not possible to manufacture the insertions to a uniform standard. And then he goes on to explain how the moldings might be made. And to me, what's most interesting is that he's kind of performing sculpture in the ways that I may be performing sculpture. And also, I mean, there are many interesting things about this patent, but he's also kind of claiming ownership over what is actually the multiplicity of bodies, right? You cannot standardize these things, and yet they become standardized. And so here, I mean, most recently I've been working in glass. A sheet of glass is slumped over a form that exercises the kind of concave and convex potentiality of his drawings. I'll just talk really briefly about the work that I'm doing now, which is sort of sitting in parallel to my reproductive technology work. I spent 2 years working in the medical device industry alongside surgeons and engineers, standing side by side in the OR. And this, I mean, I think of all of my work as embodied research, but I'm sort of reflecting on that time in the OR right now, thinking about technology and touch, transmission, and also this idea of the body as standardized. And also this idea of representations of the body. So kind of questioning what the difference is, if there is any, between, I don't know, this idea of the Magic School Bus episode, which I think we all at some point have seen. What's the difference between that and a sort of a scientific representation of the inside of the body? Sometimes I imagine the inside of my body as the Magic School Bus. So thinking about that a lot right now in a very intellectual way. And then also making sculpture out of it. So also thinking about this history of representation of the body, whether it be for scientific purposes or for kind of cultural or artistic purposes. So these are kiln cast glass pieces mounted onto standardized aluminum forms and then strung together. So I think with the work right now, I'm sort of creating this kind of gooey mess that's trying to kind of open up this idea of making and the body and that weird place between. So the Kafka piece on the left, and then on the right, these are soft or inflatable silicone forms, sort of informed from soft robotics technology. So once again, another hack. And those inflatables, they're not ephemeral works, they're actually works that require maintenance or care. So they sort of deflate over the course of the exhibition that they're in and need to be re-inflated. But they're sort of intended to evoke this sort of gooey insides, the kind of peritoneal cavity and what sits within there. And just finally, I just finished this project up in Wisconsin, but I'm sort of thinking of this as a project of accumulation in which some of my sculptures sit alongside videos and drawings. The drawings are essentially co-created with visitors in the space who are invited to come in. And I mean, by virtue of the work that I make, people are constantly telling me about their weird medical experiences. I have many of my own. I have been medicalized a lot in my life, particularly when I was younger. And I think previously I've sort of just been collecting these stories in my mind, but through this project, through these conversations, I would talk to visitors who just came in, not planning to tell me their stories, but we would talk about their experiences, and then together we would find devices or technologies that related to those experiences. And so together we would, find them and print them out, and then make these drawings based on the technologies as a way to kind of know and kind of hack and kind of interject into that otherwise very siloed space. So this is really new for me, and actually something that I'm really enjoying doing, sort of opening up the practice to a kind of participatory place. I mean, I think that's it. I'll just finish by just mentioning that I still have this IUD in me. I've never touched it. I'm still kind of obsessed with that idea. I think I'm up at 8 years now. She's a 10-year device. But in the words of the patent, I actually wear the IUD, which continues to kind of bend my mind a little bit. So this idea of the mold and the impression and the inversion and the negative still remain very important in my practice.
Thank you. Folks on Zoom, can you see this? In the presenter view or the normal view? Okay, we're good. All right. Regá, Richardson, Waggett, and Gordon Waggett are attorneys who played a key role in the passage of Texas's first breastfeeding law, Section 165 of the Texas Health Code in 1995, making Texas the fourth state in the country to enact such legislation. Their advocacy was sparked when a nursing mother was asked to leave a Houston museum, leading Regá to organize a public rally that gained significant media attention and garnered support from then Texas State Representative Deborah Danberg and then Senator John Whitmire, now Houston's mayor. This momentum led to the drafting and successful passage of HB 359 within one legislative session. Regá and Gordon co-authored a pivotal law review article in the Maryland Journal of Contemporary Legal Issues and an op-ed piece in the Houston Chronicle, both of which laid the groundwork for this legislation. Their efforts have been widely recognized, with Gordon serving on UNICEF's advisory panel for the U.S. Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative, and their work being acknowledged by the Texas Department of Health. The Waggetts remain influential voices in the ongoing fight for breastfeeding rights nationwide, remaining committed to advocating for women, children, and families. Please join me in welcoming Regá and Gordon.
Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sarah, and for having us here, and my sister, Melissa Richardson Banks. And we're really excited to be celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Texas breastfeeding law. And breastfeeding is about the mother-child relationship. And it's fitting that this picture here today was painted by my mother, who's also here, the artist, Patty Richardson. And captures the essence of my nursing my children. So as Sarah said, my husband and I are attorneys, and we became new parents, first-time parents in 1988. And we both consider ourselves feminists, and feminism took a whole new meaning when I became a parent, because I believe that feminism is about choice and about equality. And for us, we wanted to be able to do the choices that we felt strong about. And we were introduced to a group called La Leche League International, and they just fit right in with us, and they were a great support system for us as new parents. Little did we know that such an opportunity would present itself later that led us to do this breastfeeding legislation. Okay. So nursing a baby was not without obstacles. Obstacles that could dissuade a woman from nursing her baby. So in 1995, at one of the museums here in Houston, there was a woman that was nursing her baby in a recessed area of the museum, and one of the staff came up to her and said, "You need to go and nurse your baby in a restroom." this woman was mortified, and she was nursing with a blanket over her. I don't think that's even necessary, because I've known lots of nursing moms over the years, and no nursing mom wants to draw attention to herself, but she was embarrassed. And so a friend of mine that was very active with Leche League International called me and said, Regá, I think this is what you were asking for. This is something that you could put your activism with rights into work. And so we organized a rally. So I gathered my husband and my little ones at the time, and we went to the museum, and we had over 150 women, families, and nursing moms. We even gathered some media attention, and our representative, Deborah Danberg at the time, to come and to help us write this law. And so women around the country at this time were experiencing obstacles to breastfeeding. So as I think Sarah said, we were the 4th state to do this, but immediately we started hearing from all these other states. Just recently, by the way, all 50 states have legislation. So it's taken a long time, and women are still shamed, and it's still an issue today, even though we have laws now in all 50 states. So we published a scholarly article that was used as a template for writing the law. And we were, again, as I think I said, we were contacted by numerous breastfeeding moms and legislators around the country. So now we have the attention of our legislators, and we had a pending House bill.
So again, with the attention of our legislation and a pending House bill, what's the next step? We've got to get the bill passed. And getting legislation passed is no easy task on a regular day, on a regular session, but we did what we could do to move this forward as fast-tracked as possible. So one of the strategies then was we needed to light a grass fires movement across the state of Texas, so that all of the constituents of the committee members that were hearing the bill at the House and Senate side would hear from their constituents. Well, back then, we did not have the social media avenues that we have today. And so we had to resort to old school, pick up the telephone, make calls to local nursing moms and lactation consulting organizations in the jurisdictions served by the committee members. And doing so, we hoped would light that fire of support at a grassroots level and result in those constituents contacting their legislator and getting support for the bill. Well, in fact, it got a great deal of support for the bill. So apart from getting that ball moving and getting the grassroots level going, we then testified on behalf of this bill in front of the Senate committee. The interesting thing there was that we're in this glorified House chamber, very pompous setting, and there were a lot of nursing moms and their husbands and their kids, and they were all just as respectful as you could imagine anyone being in a public setting. And it actually impressed the committee members. They couldn't believe it. There were other legislative actions that were going to take place that day, and there were other suits in the room, so to speak, that were making a ruckus, but not the nursing moms. It was just a beautiful, beautiful event. So when you're trying to convince a bunch of legislators to pass a law that really should have not been necessary to start with, what do you do? Well, one thing I decided to do was to bring in some art. And I took this picture. It's an 1884 painting of a woman nursing her child in an immigration center in the United States. And I took and showed this picture to the committee. And I said, what's wrong with this picture? And I mentioned, or I proposed to them that they would answer, there is nothing wrong with it, and there's everything wrong with it. And here's why. There's everything wrong with it because, frankly, you don't see enough of this public nursing to make it normalized in the eyes of the community. So we need to do something to enhance that, to make it easier for women to feel comfortable nursing their child wherever they need to be. And you'll also answer that there's nothing wrong with it at all because, of course, nursing is the fabric of human life. It's one of the most basic connections between mother and child. And so with that, we decided, we felt like that was a message that the legislature needed to hear. So the bill passed unanimously in the House and Senate side in one session in August of 1995. That was 6 months, within 6 months of the incident that happened at the Houston Museum. That is an uncanny fast track for legislation in the state of Texas. And so we were very fortunate to have been able to move that through in steamroller fashion. And I think it's the support network of lactating moms across the state, et cetera, that really helped at the grassroots level.
And something that someone asked when we first arrived today, and they said, why would we even need a law like that? And we've been asked that so many times, but because women were asked to leave, and also because Texas, as well as many other states across the U.S., have these arcane laws. I'll give you an example. One is a woman, it's never happened in the state of Texas, but there was an old arcane law that said that a woman could be charged with homosexuality with a child for nursing her child in public. And Texas isn't alone, so people would say, well, like New York or California, you'd think some of these states would have had these kind of these laws that protected women. No. So Texas was the fourth state, and after that, then these other states kind of got on board because women were seeing these arcane laws that if someone really wanted push to shove, they could litigate or charge someone. So these were important. Okay.
I just wanted to touch a quick base on what the Texas law says before we conclude. And it essentially says a mother's entitled to breastfeed her baby or express her breast milk in any location in which the mother's presence is otherwise authorized. So that was a big thing. It gives confidence to a woman, at least something that they can take to the bank, so to speak, and feel supported. The law also established a Texas Mother-Friendly Workplace Initiative or designation to let employers set up a nice area for lactating moms, et cetera.
Okay. So thank you so much for having us here today. We were recognized, I think Sarah said, by the Texas legislators in 2015 on the 20th anniversary, and we're so delighted to be here celebrating the 30th anniversary of the breastfeeding law. And the Designing Motherhood exhibit at the center here supports the breastfeeding relationship, and that's shown by these wonderful women today too, just talking about women and women's bodies and all of the things that you all are exhibiting today. And it's our hope that women that choose to breastfeed will feel supported. And it's often said, in fact, La Leche Leagues International, their book is called The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding. And I think that's apropos for being here today because like any art form, it needs nurturing, support, and an infrastructure of care. Thanks.
Thank you, Gordon and Regá. Okay. We're going to turn it over to our next speaker, Taeshaun Walters. Taeshaun is a doula and a member of the Birthmark Doula Collective, a New Orleans-based organization that provides doula services and education for pregnancy, labor, birth, and postpartum. Birthmark Doula Collective is an official partner of the New Orleans Breastfeeding Center, stewarding their infant feeding drop-in clinics, virtual in-clinic and in-home lactation services, support groups, and education programs. They lead the emergency infant feeding program called Infant Ready, which was developed to improve infant, maternal, and community health outcomes during and after disasters. Thank you, Taeshaun. We're so delighted to have you here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here. We have no commercial or competing interests to disclose in this presentation. Here is a great photo of some of our collective members in New Orleans. We also have the first freestanding breastfeeding clinic in the state of Louisiana, and we are committed to reproductive justice, specifically in the New Orleans area. So, a little bit about the birth justice in the context of climate change. Studies have shown links between the exposure to heat, wildfire smoke, flooding, hurricanes, and fossil fuel extraction, and poor maternal health and birth outcomes. Birth justice organizations are filling the gap that the government is currently not. Infant and young child feeding in emergencies, IYCFE. The definition: supporting the nutritional needs of children ages 0 to 2 years old in any emergency situation: tornado, tsunami, earthquake, hurricane, floods, volcanoes, as such. Infant feeding practices and infant health. Breast and chest feeding contains antibodies and disease-fighting factors, safe and accessible source of food and water, and keep infants warm and lower stress, just to name a few. Formula feeding, unfortunately, increases the risk of disease and infection due to food and fuel shortages, lack of clean water and sanitation, and disrupted health infrastructure. And one of our biggest concerns is definitely the lack of clean water. We really need that to make the formula as safe as possible when preparing it. Birthmark's Infant Ready Emergency Program. We start off as supporting families with tools and information to practice safe infant feeding in disasters. We do a disaster preparedness training program and community outreach. We do emergency feeding kits and educational booklets to disseminate to families. And we do an informational hotline for families as well that can be very beneficial. And afterwards, we like to do a program evaluation to assure that we are meeting the needs of all of our families that we are serving. Here we can see one of our emergency feeding kits. It typically comes in a very bright color bag, typically orange or yellow. It is a water-resistant bag. We have hand sanitizer and sterilizing wipes located in the bag to keep our hands clean, and sterilizing surfaces when preparing powdered formula or any other powdered substances. Disposable medicine cups to express fresh breast milk in, breast milk storage bags to store breast milk, a cooler bag, and disposable ice pack to keep everything as fresh and cool as possible. We have a permanent marker so that families can label their breast milk storage bags. A nursing cover only if families feel like they need it, specifically thinking about in shelters where there's maybe a lot of strangers that they're not used to being around. And there was also a lot of incidences in shelters around sexual assault. And so that's also there for that as well. We have a little light in there, a little LED light, just in case you're in a little dark area, maybe even in a shelter, or if you're at home and the lights are out for a moment. And then bottled water for access to clean, safe water to prepare those powdered substances, face mask, and an educational booklet. And here is the booklet. It is low literacy, visually diverse, and it's available in English, Spanish, and English Vietnamese. It contains essential teaching on safe infant feeding in emergency situations, and it's useful for caregivers and emergency responders as well. And it's all in color with beautiful illustrations. And this concludes my presentation. I truly, truly appreciate you. If you are interested in purchasing any of these kits for your organizations to disseminate to families, please never hesitate to reach out. We would be so happy to support you in that endeavor. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Tay. And for our final lightning round presentation, I am so honored to introduce Fran Wang, co-founder and CEO of Yona Care, an early-stage startup redesigning the vaginal speculum that improves reproductive care outcomes by addressing provider pain points and considering patient experience. Yona's work is informed through the process of design research, including patients, providers, and the many people involved within the systems of care. Beyond the speculum, Yona strives to change reproductive care for the better, one vagina at a time. Turn it over to you, Fran. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Just making sure everybody can see my screen. Awesome. Thank you. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you all for having me. Really, really feeling privileged to be here on this panel with such amazing presenters. So thank you for having me. Like Sarah's saying, my name is Fran. I am actually a mechanical engineer by training, and I'm one of the co-founders of Yona Care, and we are redesigning the vaginal speculum. So the vaginal speculum is one of the main tools that is used in gynecological care. And something that we learned during this process is many people don't know what it looks like. It's something that gets inserted into the body during a pap smear or an IUD insertion, and a number of other procedures as well. And it's really surprising, but also not surprising at all that many people don't know what it looks like. If you go back and look into the original patent, the speculum has remained largely unchanged. It looks very, very similar to where it started, and it started in a really dark place. It was a device that was developed in very, very racist and sexist conditions. And so it's something that we can really focus on as an item that is a key piece of care that is also a key piece that carries a lot of history in it. So if you look at the speculum, it's got these metal bills. People describe it as a duck-billed speculum. It's often plastic or metal. The plastic one has a light attached to it as well, but the metal one has these jingly screws. It can pinch tissue. It's a very scary looking device. So a lot of people have asked us, why the speculum and why now? So I think if you've ever had an exam, the why, the speculum is very obvious. It's painful, it's uncomfortable, but the why now? Why not earlier is kind of the rebuttal to that question, because it's something that's been around for so long and people have just tolerated it. And so we wanted to readdress this item in the context of everybody who uses it, not just the providers who are using this day in and day out, but also the patient who experiences this on a receiving end in a very compromised place, but also in the cultural context of where we are today. And this question becomes more and more pressing every single day now, especially in the political environment that we're in. One of the key tenets of Yona Care is that everything that we do is research informed. And so when we were first beginning, we thought that we understood this exam and we thought that we understood our piece of the experience that we've had with this exam and with this tool. And over the course of our research, we just realized how little that we really know, talking to other patients and understanding other patients' experiences, talking to providers and understanding that each of them sees perhaps a different demographic of patients or just a different subset of patients who have different experiences. And then realizing that there are way more experiences beyond just a cisgendered heterosexual woman's experience at a gyno, which is already challenging enough. And so a lot of our work is in interviews. So that is in person, talking to providers, talking to patients, just hearing their experiences and understanding their own perspectives on this exam. And not so recently, but we did a study a while back with LGBTQ patients. So again, going beyond cisgender heterosexual women's experiences in pelvic health. And currently we're going through yet another phase of research with providers and understanding that every provider has their own perspective as well. And there are a huge range of provider experiences in terms of their training and background. So everything from emergency gynecology to midwifery. And all of them have something to offer in the space of reproductive care. So through that process, we've been developing our speculum. This is the Yona speculum, and we've made a number of key changes that address both the needs of providers and patients and trying to understand where those needs overlap. So for example, we have a patented 3-leaf design, and this 3-leaf design helps both providers because it improves the field of view and tool access, but also reduces the opening pressure for the patients, and so reducing discomfort that they would feel. So, like what is the impact? And this is something that gets asked like again to the why. And if we look at it not in the grand scheme of how much is it going to affect health overall, but for the individual, right? For an average individual, they're going to experience approximately 30 exams minimum in their life. If you think about having your regular PAP exams, and then perhaps if you're looking to have a child, you would have an additional exam. If you have any sort of, infection or what have you, that's an additional exam, IUDs, more exams, all these procedures, right, in our interactions with the speculum. And so overall, that's an enormous number. And something one of our advisors said is, like we can talk about the impact as a whole, like across a nation or across the world, but really the impact is at the individual level. And every single exam is an opportunity to change a person's relationship with their own body and with reproductive care. And so that is really unquantifiable. And so thank you for having me. I love to talk about speculums and vaginas, so let me know and we can talk more about it.
Thank you to all of our just absolutely incredible speakers for their amazing insight into their process and their work. We are going to turn it over now into a moderated conversation. So I'm going to switch this camera. See if this works. Okay. All right. So I wanted to step back a little bit and talk about the why for this exhibition. I mean, we have assembled quite a constellation of speakers just today, and I think the infrastructures and networks of support and care that it takes to even bring something like today's panel together speaks volumes about, the infrastructures and networks of care that it takes to provide healthcare to our populations. And I think that, we're here on Valentine's Day too. And I've been thinking a lot about how we can talk about infrastructures from a macro level and then kind of zoom in. And we're starting with healthcare legislation, policy, and something that Designing Motherhood does so well and so uniquely is framing design in an expansive way. So the show has reproductive policies in it. It has architecture in it. It has physical infrastructure, and it also has design objects. It has education campaigns. It has hackathons. So this kind of really expansive way of considering design really informs the way the show has developed, of course, but I think it's a nice way to frame all of your works too. So I wanted to start macro, and we're here in the Gulf Coast and in Texas, in a place where when I moved here 2 years ago and change, one legislative policy shifted the individual experience of reproductive health care from maybe 15 minutes to an 18-hour round trip for some folks. So thinking about the kind of design impact that one legislative policy can have, and I think that was a great segue, Fran. One object is used by half the population or more 30 times in their life or more. So the kind of human impact of these kinds of invisible structures that are shaping our experiences. So I'm wondering if we could start with how you conceive of support and care in your own work. And Fran, I know you don't have a microphone to pass, but maybe we could start with the Waggets.
Well, supporting the network of care or an infrastructure of care is I think it's important in many facets of our lives. And even at the technology level, I mean, I was fascinated. I'm actually an intellectual property lawyer. I was not really a lawyer skilled or with a background in breastfeeding rights, but I became one in 1995 along with Regá. But it's so interesting that technology can be found at the foundation of so many things that impact our lives, and intellectual property, the notion that somebody may come up with an invention that impacts somebody else's lives for so many years is kind of amazing.
I don't know if I have to add to that.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel very conflicted continually with just looking into reproductive technology from an IP perspective and from a sort of object-oriented perspective, because I think that I mean, I didn't mention this in my lightning round, but I have in the last few years been thinking a lot about how having an IUD actually neutralizes bodies from this conversation. It actually lowers the stakes. And I just think it's important to point that out, that in some ways having a contraceptive device or chemical in the body sort of shifts that narrative for that individual body, mine included. And that's of course an incredible privilege, but it's also for me a choice that I have to access. And so there are so many ways to kind of frame technology. I think for me, I never have a position on it that it is one way or the other, because I think that that kind of technology has at once been very liberatory, but also in many cases repressive and violent. And I would also add that, I mean, I'm so happy to see so many female-led and gender conforming-led groups that are sort of paving the way for change and new ways of access and equity and education for this kind of really important space. But I also think it's important to state that 99.99% of authors of reproductive technology, at least in patents, are authored by people with male names. And so I think there's a lot to kind of shift. But yeah, it's sort of, for me, I sort of feel like the conversation is always shifting between this idea of control and freedom, right? It's kind of double-sided for me. Yeah.
While we have the mic, I was struck by in your presentation, you said that IUDs and other contraceptive devices are regionally specific. And you also talked about design patents and the kind of like iterative process of design as this kind of speculative, almost like speculative fiction space. Could you talk to us a little bit more about the regional specificity and just kind of setting this conversation here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's so much to say. I didn't think that I stated it, but the work that's of mine that's in the Designing Motherhood show is a map of these patents. And that map continues to change. It's kind of an ongoing project. So since 2021, with the Water Museum show, the map has kind of been updated because the sheer mass of digitization of these documents of patents continues to proliferate. So, I mean, one really interesting point, and I actually need to update my map because of this, is that a lot of the non-English language patents were not included originally in my mapping because I sort of didn't feel confident that I could sort of, be sure that these devices related to that kind of typology and that history. But in the last, say, 2 or 3 years, there's been a lot of digital translation happening. So, for example, if you look at the Chinese patents, there is an entire different history and formal quality that those objects take on. So there are so many different ways of looking at it. To me, it's a species. The IUD that I have, actually, there is a version of it in the show, which I was really happy to see. But it's mostly confined to Southeast Asia and Oceania, to my knowledge. And then you see different IUDs here too. And that also has to do with
systems of IP, of copyright, and also kind of cultural and political beliefs in those kinds of places. So growing up in Australia, IUDs are actually deeply stigmatized, whereas here I don't know that it was as stigmatized. My understanding of it is that it's largely because of the Darro Shield, the trials of the Darro Shield in the 1970s. And you can actually see that after the IUD, the Darro Shield was pulled off the market, there is a very steep decline in patents being sort of put on the market, patents being lodged for about 10 or 15 years. So you kind of see that gap as well. So the stigma actually proliferates throughout the lineage.
We are here in Houston, where this exhibition actually was delayed due to climate crisis and a hurricane. And I would love to hear your perspective, Tay, about parenting in climate crisis and the kind of infrastructures of care that you mentioned you're having to kind of fill the gap because there isn't really a federal kind of system in place that is efficacious. So I'm wondering if you could chat a little bit about how your organization is stepping into that gap.
I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You're meaning the intersectionalities of how we support families on that in the level that we do. Is that what you're saying? It sounds a little bit muffled. You sound like a little far away.
So, thinking about citing this show in the Gulf Coast and how care in regions which we're realizing now are, no areas kind of safe from being affected by climate change. But specifically in New Orleans and Houston, that often are kind of wrecked by climate crisis. Could you talk about the infrastructures of care that your doula collective is stepping in and providing?
Okay, yes, absolutely. So for our organization, we tend to partner with a lot of organizations here in New Orleans to be more of a collective impact. New Orleans is a very special place in regards to our birth organizations, early childhood education organizations, and Black doula organizations, lactation support, and we all really come together. Typically, we hold a big event right before hurricane season, where we are disseminating lots of supplies, specifically our kits, to families. And when they come to these events, we are trying to give them as much information regarding WIC services so that they can continue to see their WIC if they evacuate to another state, just trying to support them in every robust way. We also implement a hotline for families, and this hotline is manned by people from here in New Orleans. I think we made a couple of connections in Mississippi and also in Florida as well to help us man the hotline to really support these families while they're there, giving them the resources that they may need. And so we are really like boots on the ground, connecting with the Louisiana Health Department as well. We do a lot of presentations with them to help us get this movement forward, to give it to as many families in the city as possible. We also work with some other birth justice organizations in Mississippi as well. This just really just helps us to get our movement forward and really just helping support our families in the most robust way.
I think what has moved me so much in assembling this exhibition here is seeing how all of these incredible thought leaders in their respective fields, whether it be artists, designers, policymakers, are kind of invisibly shifting the needle in the way that we can more safely access and experience reproductive health. I'm wondering, Alicia, if you could talk about your experience of mounting this work at the Supreme Court and how meaningful it's been to cite this project in Texas.
Yeah. So
I was reflecting on like your previous question about support and care. And I think for me personally, as you can see probably in the work examples that I showed, like reproductive health is not necessarily the like central kind of key factor or kind of conceptual driving force behind most of my work. I think a lot about time and mortality and experience of time, and sort of like shared humanity in that way. So the invitation to collaborate with Planned Parenthood was really meaningful to me because I think like for me, it is my way of caring and supporting a movement that I feel is really important for reproductive health and abortion rights, which I personally very much believe in, and want to fight for. But I think we all, find our own way in which to participate and care and support those types of movements and political actions. So whether that be, showing up at a protest or donating money or what have you. And for me, I think the ability to kind of like create, I think to take advantage of my own privilege and also to take advantage of my work's visibility, and also the sort of conceptual tie-in of light and hope and the interchangeability of the words, bodies, and futures and abortions, as a way of sort of hoping, like my hope is to sort of poetically express the fact that one can't exist without the other, and they all really are the same, thing. It has been like extremely meaningful to me, especially as someone who is not born and raised in Texas, but lives here now, and is personally affected by the legislature and the legalization of abortion, but I have a privilege in which to act in ways that a lot of people don't. So.
I wonder if you could speak more about the kind of architectonic ways that your work reaches people. You mentioned it's on trucks, it's moving through cities, it's kind of, it's at the top of hikes, it's on tops of buildings, these kind of monuments of light. Could you talk a little bit about how you are tapping into infrastructure to make your artwork?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I definitely, like I said, like steal these strategies that advertising uses. I definitely, take advantage of like the architecture of signage, and thinking even about like road signs and other ways in which we engage with signs in our built environment. It's very much like an important part of our infrastructure. When we think about signs, it's like kind of like locating ourselves in a place or in a moment, figuring out where we want to go, and then like using signs to help navigate our passage through space and time to get where we want to go. So that's something that I definitely think about.
I'm wondering if Fran and Martha, each of you could talk a bit about the importance of building networks of kind of women-led designers and researchers, and the kind of significance of a redesign speculum coming from that perspective, and the role that kind of infrastructures of educating or disseminating knowledge about this has played in your work.
I can jump in first. So I think I understood. I think I heard the question right. So I think from my perspective, expanding kind of the source of these tools, or like the source of the ideas, or the origin of these tools is a key piece of this work, right? So from my perspective, like when we started Yona, we're like, wow, like this is something that was designed by a white man. And so it's like, what if we took this and made it a woman's perspective? And that was a starting point, and we thought that that was like a pretty pivotal change. And then in the process, we realized like, okay, well, just the perspective of a woman isn't enough, right? What about the perspective of a person who's non-binary? What about the perspective of a trans woman? What about like all of these other perspectives as well? And that's why we depend on research so much. And so I would like to think that Yona, yeah, we are a woman-founded company, but we're also an informed company beyond the perspective of, just being a cisgender woman. And I think that is the piece that you're talking about, a network, kind of like expanding perspective, expanding experience and understanding beyond a single person's or a single group of people. And the infrastructure that we're tapping into it really has been incredible, talking to providers and patients. This is a space that people feel really passionate about. And something about asking somebody like, oh, how was your last pelvic exam? It's like giving somebody a microphone and people instantly just want to share whatever their last experience was. And that's been really inspiring, like good, bad, hideously ugly, like horrible, but also like enlightening and amazing and or empowering. And people have just been so open and willing to share that with us. And that has been an incredible piece of this process and this journey that I did not expect at all, like how willing people would be to share their time and experience with us. So that is infrastructure in terms of development and changing and making progress that has been really amazing to see. And then just one other thought from an earlier question, Sarah, which is around larger infrastructures of care. In the course of this research, as we start to talk to providers, it's been interesting because I feel like the speculum was this like loose thread, and we're like, we're going to pull on it and see what happens. And in this process of research, I feel like I've unraveled the whole sweater, which is now we're starting to think about like, okay, beyond the speculum, like what do providers need in their clinic? Like, oh, now we're thinking about the logistics of speculums. Now we're talking about how pap smears get reimbursed in insurance. Now we're talking about legislation behind all of this, like what is legally available in states here, but not there. And all this is connected, right? When we talk about infrastructures of care for the speculum, we're actually talking about everything invisible, maybe to the patient behind it. But it's all super connected and it's been super interesting to see. So it's kind of an aside.
Great. I love you talking about how it's invisible maybe, but it's really embodied in our lived experience, like we're not seeing the kind of butterfly effect of how all of these ecosystems and networks of care inform each other. But even you talking about kind of the R&D process and hearing from diverse perspectives to be able to develop a product in the first place, and the kind of structural violence that can be built into even organizing a kind of a group to test to begin with. And we've seen the effects of this in like the way cars are designed, and all of the not thinking about diverse kinds of bodies who are going to be interfacing with these products. But I wanted to ask each of you to also respond to something that I noticed in organizing the craft iteration of this show. There's this, it feels like there's this like severing of kind of ancestral knowledge and craft knowledge that happens when kind of Western medicine enters the conversation. And I'm wondering if you could respond to that. I know, Martha, you mentioned studying abortifacient plants and like other kinds of research before you entered medical care.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I often talk about technology. I mean, I'm very interested, obviously, in technology, but I also think the term technology is very problematic in the way that it's used today. So, I mean, if you look at the Latin root, it's a techno logic and a knowledge of making. And I think that it's important to talk about technology or to kind of problemize technology when it's not placed in relationship to other ways of making, so craft modes of making, ancestral and indigenous ways of making, oral histories as well. That's a kind of craft to me. And I think that like talking about patent and IP technology it is a very, in my eyes, a colonial trait, and that actually takes up so much space that all of these other ways of knowing and thinking, and of kind of having power over the body, that kind of like crushed. So my background is in fashion and textiles. So that was my first degree, my undergraduate degree, and then I went and did an MFA in design objects. And so I think I've always been interested in the body and this idea. I think, you know, everyone has a body, everyone's body is different, but at the same time, we get kind of standardized and forced into all of these systems that I think want to care for us, but ultimately can be incredibly violent and impressive. I think I'm going off script here, or off topic, but yeah.
I have a question for Gordon and Regá. You mentioned that not only you defined the legislation that was enacted, but you also, there's this kind of sub section about creating spaces for lactating in public, or could you talk a little bit about how it translated from that, the kind of policy design to maybe kind of physical infrastructure, creating lactation spaces, for instance? I know we're still, there's a dearth of like lactation pods or specific lactation rooms in our everyday infrastructure. Every now and again, you'll see one at an airport, maybe. But can you talk a little bit about that?
I think that there's certainly more places like that today, but it's still wanting women to be nursing their babies in a way that no one can see. And so even though we have these superficial, these rooms, or these rooms that are designated as a safe place to do it, to nurse your child, it's still, I think that women still, and I have young women still tell me today, as long as I'm doing it where no one is looking at my body, you know, or as if I'm trying to be a spectacle. And we still have such a long way to go. You know, when we wrote this law 30 years ago, we never thought that our daughter today, 35 years later, would have some of the same concerns and shaming that happens in the public. So, yeah, there's still lots of work. And that's why these sorts of exhibits are so important to talk about.
Well, I'll add something just from a historical perspective. With the mother-friendly designation in the workplace, the way the Texas legislature dealt with it initially was, let's create a pilot study. So in one of the Department of Health buildings or something like that, they set up a pilot study to actually see if this could work. I mean, it's intuitively obvious that it could work and it should work and it should be easy to do, but then they start getting into turf wars. What space is going to be dedicated to this in this building that's full of people wanting spaces? So there was a little bit of that going on. But I know that as time has gone on, 30 plus years now, I mean, we've at least seen more of these, so that lactating moms that are working moms, and there's a lot of them out there, that they just can't, pump at home or run off back home to nurse their child and then come back to work. So having the ability to pump at work, for example, or frankly, to have their baby brought to them in a safe place or a nice place within the building, I think is an ideal way to move this into the future. But I think a lot of employers have resistance to it. And it's frankly partly economics. There's a dedicated space. Oh, we need that for the computer room, something, So
I know I'm hijacking your presentation, but I am one of those nursing moms from the 90s and earlier, also a professional who never had a place for pumping or nursing my child. And as an architect, I can tell you what you all did had direct impact on design in workplace environments in this city and across the nation. I'm telling you that because I witnessed it as a designer today, it's not something that people argue about. It's like, where's the lactation room? And we do it day in, day out, because it's not only provides support to mothers, but it's a recruitment tool to be able to bring talent on board. If you do not have that, you're not able to bring that talent on board. So I want to thank you all, number one. I probably know a lot of the same Waggett people, and I wanted to let you know that it is changing. Now, whether we feel like we should be able to, you know, open our blouses and latch on with our baby in public, that's a personal choice too. And I think, you know, yes, it'd be great to see more of it. I grew up in Latin America where everybody did. But I also grew up in a generation where my mother didn't here in this country. So we've come a long way, you know. I also want, now I have the platform. Yes. I want to comment on other things. I don't know your name, the lady in New Orleans, but thank you for doing what you're doing, because you are providing the gap that women in my generation had, because our mothers did not nurse us. And the knowledge, that knowledge of how to do so and how to keep safe with your babies, I think is incredible. So thank you for doing that. As a woman who has over 30 some experiences with the metal cold device, thank you so much for introducing one that looks beautiful and is plastic and or silicone or something that doesn't scare me. As an artist with IUDs that are kind of weird looking that you never got to see, I'm very intrigued by it. I'm intrigued by the relationship of having contraception and the right to your body in connection with motherhood is a wonderful dialogue to have, and it is the same. So thank you for that. And Alicia, your words are phenomenal. I love the dual messaging on it, and I'm most intrigued on how you might tie this into using solar and using energy so it becomes even more mobile and more remote. And I think the idea of what we call it, guerrilla messaging is so freaking cool. I am thrilled to have been invited to come to this session. Thank you so much for everything.
Oh, incredible. Yeah, thank you. Wow. Thank you for being here today. That's incredible hearing from an architect who was directly. Okay, so I want to open it up. We have a really nice intimate audience here. I don't know if we have other questions from the audience. I could talk to all of you like for all time. This could just go on and forever, but I wanted to maybe I can help guide a few closing questions. You know, I keep hearing this refrain over and over again since we've taken this show on, that it takes a village to raise a child, and I've heard a lot of sadness about the kind of dissolution of those kinds of networks of support, particularly in the United States, where there aren't kind of federal safety nets or supports for things like maternity leave or parenting and climate crisis or you know, legislative access to healthcare. So I think each of you are kind of actors in this really large infrastructure network, from architecture and policy to these, to IUDs, which, as you say, we wear around, and they're invisible. Maybe we've never touched it, but again, still really informing this network. Could you each talk a little bit about maybe getting to the design part and hope of this show? what you envision the future, the speculative fiction that you want to see in care space and in reproductive health care.
Well, I think, thank you so much for the comments about the workplace and the lactation rooms and the impact of the law. That made us feel very, very gratified. I think I like the concept of technology and some of this as being speculative because ideas are speculative. Whether they become realities in a commercial sense is a completely different ballgame. Whether they become monetized in a patent sense is a different ballgame. But that impacts what gets out into the marketplace for our population. And the power players have something to do with that too. They may buy up technology and squash it, and so that it never sees the light of day. Maybe somebody, years back proposed a plastic speculum type device, but the original manufacturers that had a corner on the market now, not necessarily with a patent, but with marketing, didn't want a newcomer, so they maybe bought it up and tabled it. So there's a lot of things like that, but I think it's important for the network of community and support to continue on all these fronts and for everybody to realize how interconnected this all is. I didn't realize how interconnected we all were today. And just having a little conversation was pretty amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. I think I almost lost sight of the question with so many different things being shared, but I think something that you mentioned, and I just wanted to touch on this, because we are in a museum and we're talking about art, but my mother also did not nurse. And so my mom was, the 50s, so her generation was happy to see the models. And so, but the one thing that she was really great with me was, I remember when I came home, I said, well, I had a friend who actually never had children. In fact, she just texted me today. And she's the one that 35 years ago said, Regá, I have a friend that goes to this organization called the Leche League International. You should maybe check it out. I thought, oh, I don't know. And the rest is history. I went and then we wrote this law together. But my mom, even though she didn't nurse, she knew that I wanted to. And she knew how strong-willed I was when I wanted to do something. And she said, well, maybe what your friend Judith talked about, that LLL meeting, maybe you should go. And I did. And I found that, that it was a place where I could go and I could learn this art. Because it is an art. I'm talking about technology. There's different kinds of art, and I am, forever grateful that I went and I had a mom that, even though she didn't know anything about it, said, go do it. And I'm hopeful that will continue, and thank you again for having us here.
I have a lot of hopes. I think multiplicity is key. This idea of there being many options and many different ways and things to access. So sort of opening everything up, I think, is really important. There are a lot of technologies that have been shelved. Patents or pieces of technology that have been purchased by companies with competing interests. So I personally would like to see more contraceptive devices specifically for people with semen. There are many which aren't being taken advantage of right now because there's just so much money and opportunity in contraceptive devices and technologies for people with uteruses. And I also think, I was just thinking about that amazing breastfeeding bag and this idea of Ursula K. Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction. This idea that the first technology is actually a carry bag and not the sphere or the object of violence, and that it's actually about collecting and creating. I feel like the analogy there is that the carry bag is actually the collective and the community, and then it's more about opening things up rather and trying to silo things down, which is, I think, what went on at this point. Yeah.
That was amazing. I agree about the community like aspect of this, and all of us bringing our own research and expertise, like whether it is, you know, law or design or community outreach. And I think I mean, I don't really have much to add with my own words, but I wanted to read a quote from the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood, Alexis McGill-Johnson, because I think it really speaks to answering this question. She said, "This moment is dark, and that is why we are here. Movements exist because of darkness, and it is our job to imagine the light even when we can't see it." And I think what's cool about this panel, and I appreciate you bringing us all together, is I feel like we're all doing that, and we share our lives.
I'm going to turn it over to you, maybe Tay and then Fran for closing remarks.
Close it up.
Yes, absolutely. I was sitting here thinking I left out a very important part when you spoke about Xing, like what are we replacing that the government is not doing? And it's really the focus on infant feeding in emergencies. There's not a lot of organizations specifically focusing on that and really helping to increase and sustain those breastfeeding rates. And so that's one of the things that we are addressing. But in context to environmental health, we are truly still fighting so many things. There are certain areas in Louisiana where they call it Cancer Alley, and we've been seeing that it's really impacting reproductive health and women deciding to breastfeeding, or those deciding to breastfeeding, birthing people deciding to breastfeed, just impacting their decisions about birth, all regarding to climate change and environmental factors. So it's just very interesting to think about, and how all of our work is kind of intersecting. It's just really amazing to see all of these bodies of work, the artists and the work in breastfeeding support in Texas. And it's just a very exciting panel discussion. And I'm just grateful that I was able to be here. So thank y'all so much.
Likewise, super, super grateful to be here and hear everybody's stories. Sarah, to your question around the speculative future, I think that everything regarding reproductive care will always be sacred, but I'm excited for when it becomes unexceptional. And I mean that in the sense that, you know, right now reproductive care is its own separate entity, and it's an entity that we have to protect and fight for separately. Like, we don't have these arguments about healthcare. Like, if you need to go in and get your blood pressure screened, nobody is like chastising you or forcing you to drive across state lines to do it. And so reproductive care is part of care to me. And so I think in the speculative future, like all the work that we do and all the work that is happening out there will hopefully push us towards a place where it no longer is so separate and no longer so contentious. And it just becomes part of the norm of like, oh, well, we're taking care of ourselves, or we're taking care of a child, or taking care of a future child, or like not taking care of like whatever else, you know, like whatever choice you need to make becomes sort of just like a choice that is private, and also just part of the decisions that you would make about your own body, and not something that is separate and has to be defensible.
Here, here. Thank you so much. Please, can we have a round of applause for these incredible speakers? It's my thank you all so much for being here. And I think I'll borrow Martha's carry bag. I've seen my own experience of watching folks in this show. Like, there's so much carrying that happens in parenthood, baby carrying, just like object carrying. And I think the hopeful technology of bringing of the carry bag is a great way to end it. And let's continue the conversation. This show I've seen over the course of its 5 iterations now, all of these, as you said, Gordon, kind of like speculative ideas, or, you know, ideas, designs, legislation, those are all speculative until they're enacted and brought, kind of manifested, and let's continue the work. So, thanks. Thank you, Fran and Taeshaun. Fran is joining us from China right now, and it's maybe 3 a.m. So we really appreciate you. Thank you all so much. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.